Welcome back to Zevo Talks. My name is Davina Ramkasoon. I am the Health and Wellbeing Director here at Zevo Health, and today I'll be your host. I'm joined by John Lonergan. John is an author, public speaker, and has worked in the Irish prison service for over 42 years, including being the governor of Mountjoy in Dublin City. John is a huge believer in social reform and mental health. You can see a huge link between prisons and the workplace, and how both environments can be improved to maximise the positive mental effects and thriving on the individual. So thank you for joining us today, John.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure, yeah.
Thanks. So John, we've had some great chats in the past, and I've been so fascinated by your career history. But I'd love for you to maybe just give our listeners a little overview about your career and maybe just briefly telling us what attracted you to work in the prison service to begin with.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm a native of Tipperary. So I grew up in the countryside in a little place called Banshee in West Tipperary. Knew nothing in the world about prisons, didn't even hear of them. Except occasionally they might make the news when there was an escape or something. But other than that, I knew nothing about prisons, and I had no ambition in the world, obviously, to join the prison service. But I did so more by accident than design in 1968. That's 53 years ago gone, since the 8th of March just gone, which is a long time ago, a different world and a different Ireland in 1968. And I went into work in the prison system on the basis of just that I noticed or became aware of a public notification by the then Civil Service Commission, which is not any longer there either. And I applied and was interviewed and did an exam, and eventually was assigned to Limerick Prison on the 8th of March 1968. And I entered the job on the basis with the naive belief that I had at that stage. I was just 20, so I hadn't much life experience, and I entered the prison service, I suppose, on the belief that all the bad people would be in prison and all the good people would be outside. And honestly, I wasn't there a week when I realized, well, that perception and belief is certainly not true. Because what I found there at that stage were mostly men, many of them with learning difficulties, psychiatric difficulties, physical difficulties, all types of difficulties, and maybe one or two serious criminals mixed amongst them. So I realized almost instantly that prisons were being used very much as dumping grounds and dumping institutions for misfits and social rejects in society rather than bad, dangerous people. And so I started, I suppose, to learn almost from that day onwards that life wasn't as black and white as you think it is, and being judgmental was definitely a dangerous thing to do. And I did try to practice that for the rest of the 42 years I spent in prison, because I learned that very early on, that being judgmental was definitely not something you could do and participate in and still do your job, because of all the things you don't know about people.
Mm-hmm.
And so then after that, I spent quite a number of years early on, 3 years in Limerick. Then I went to an open centre in Shanganagh Castle, that's gone now as well. But it was an open centre which completely changed the dynamic of a prison. Closed prisons operate on the dynamic of mistrust. We'll talk about mistrust later on, because that's a big issue in relation to the well-being and how people feel and all that sort of thing. And if you're, no matter where you are in the workplace or at home, if there's a huge element of mistrust, well, that is damaging to your well-being in every aspect, but certainly your mental well-being. So the open centre concept is the complete opposite of that, because there were no boundary fences, no walls, no barriers, physical barriers. So the person was young people, they were for 16 to 21-year-olds, they were transferred there on the basis of trust. So they stayed there because they agreed to stay there rather than they were made or physically contained there. And I learned a lot as well about young men from that experience. And then I suppose the other experience that I'd have to mention is I was subsequently promoted to different grades, and I suppose the next major experience I had was I had a job as an assistant director of Lochan House, which was an industrial school at that time in the late 1970s for children between the ages of 12 and 16. The Department of Education failed in its job to look after children that were in need of some type of secure detention, and they were handed over to the responsibility, or under the responsibility of the Minister for Justice, and I was sent up to Lahan House in Blacklion to look after them, and that was an amazing experience of what I suppose working with children that had been deprived of everything always in life. And they weren't bad people at all, or bad young people. They were simply just wild and had no structures and no boundaries. And that's where I became very aware of the importance of boundaries, but mainly boundaries by agreement rather than boundaries by imposition. And there's a huge difference. And Irish society would have been built on and developed over many decades on the basis of imposing boundaries on people, rather than getting their agreement and involvement in it. And that was an amazing experience. And then in 1984, I was appointed governor of Mountjoy. I spent 4 years as governor of Mountjoy. Then they asked me to go, the Department of Justice asked me to go to Portlaoise to be governor of the top security prison, which I did I was asked to go for 2 years, but I actually stayed for 4 years. And then I went back to Mountjoy and spent another 18 years in Mountjoy. So I spent 27 years in total as a governor, 24 or 23 in Mountjoy and 4 in Portlaoise. And I retired then in 2010. So I suppose to summarize then, I learned almost everything I know from that experience of working in prison. Very unique experience, but a very valuable experience that most people don't have. Because of the dynamics, as I said, of prison, where people are confined against their will rather than, and so the whole dynamic all the time, and the challenge was to try to get some growth and development into, to help people grow and develop in that environment of mistrust and negativity. And it was a challenge, but it's amazing some of the things that worked very well, and we can talk about some of those later on if you wish.
Yeah, that would be great, because I'm just thinking, like, you have so much experience, viewing the full spectrum of life. You've seen, how when things go well, how, your prisoners can be reformed, how they might just need some of those boundaries put in place, the respect, the care, and also the other side of, children being brought up in poverty, mental health illness, maybe parents who've had mental health illness, psychiatric illness themselves, and seeing them come through the prison service, as you mentioned. And I was just going to say, when you were touching on about, how you reform prisoners, or, give them that care to make them think a bit bigger beyond the walls of which are imposed around them. How was it, when you saw prisoners come in, and that contrast between the prisoners who maybe got on with the kind of adopted the mindset of being institutionalized, versus the prisoners who had that eye-opening to say, maybe I don't want my life to be this way, maybe there's another option. I'm just interested to hear about that perspective on the institutionalization, and maybe if there are any parallels that you've seen in general life and in workplace in general.
Yeah, first of all, there is a huge connection between what happens in normal life and what happens in prison. And when I used to say this when I was working, a lot of people found it sort of strange or funny or mad, because they didn't. But I mean, I suppose one of the things I used to always say and realize from an early stage is prisons are all about people. They're not about institutions. They're not about security. They're actually about people. People who work there and the people who are confined there. And that was a big, a fundamental basis of my work and philosophy, was that we're talking about people now. And I also said, way back, I publicly used to make a lot of talk publicly a lot of the time, mainly to try to convey the picture, a picture and a message out to the general public. I said very early on in my career, because prisoners are often referred to as them by mainstream society, them. Well, they're not them at all. They're us. They're very much us. They're, they grew up in our houses and our streets. They were educated or not in our schools, and so they're all part of us. And that was the first thing that I thought was, it was very easy to say them, and that exonerates us from any responsibility. Well, it's not our fault. Well, it is actually. We all have a responsibility to why people end up in prison and why people are disconnected and alienated. So that was very much, to understand that as well about people. I suppose the other thing, there's a huge connection, in my view, with any management or any workplace or anybody that's working with other people, and that is to have as your fundamental principle, and work off the principle of always showing respect. And that is very challenging in prison, because I mentioned earlier on about the dangers of being judgmental. And I had a great battle with staff and with lots of people, mainly with staff, about that, to try to encourage them not to be judgmental. Like, oh, he's a rapist, so we want nothing to do with him. But he's okay because he's only in for embezzlement. Sure, he could, once you go down that road of, well, he's one and he's somehow, she's this and she's that, she's a child neglector. Oh my God. But she's only a misfortune. Once you go that road, then you're absolutely disaster. And that applies in the workplace as well. Being judgmental and not showing respect. And so the fundamental philosophy was about showing respect. And I used to try to do that indeed I used to discriminate in a way in favor of those in prison, because my philosophy was, for staff and for everybody else, we all had options. The option of leaving, I'm gone. But prisoners had no options. They were confined, and therefore they had no way of being relieved of this. And the other thing I suppose about it was that I found it to work absolutely 100%. To the extent that I can say now, 10 years after retiring, that I've so far never met an ex-prisoner that has been abusive or disrespectful, or actually the opposite, the very, very opposite. In their hundreds, I meet them on the streets of Dublin and Cork and Limerick in particular, the bigger cities and towns, when I go out or when I'm going socialise anywhere. I meet them in their hundreds. And as I said, to a man and a woman, and that is based on that very fundamental thing. And that's the start of it. Then the next point I'd make is, I learned as well, you cannot reform anybody else. So give up. Don't even think about it.
Yeah.
What you have to do is, I learned, I'll share this little bit of philosophy with you, because it's not mine. It was written, they claim it was written 600 years before Christ. Now, whether it was or wasn't, doesn't matter. But it was written by a Chinese, and it was fantastic philosophy. And it was about that, about working with people and trying to get the best out of them. And it goes something like this: go to the people, live with them, love them. Now, that's very important, and it's not, as you know, a romantic love. It's because what's in love, it's about respect, it's about acceptance, it's about taking an interest in, being supportive of, being caring of. So all the principles are that. So go to the people, live with them, love them, start with what they have, build with what they know. But when the work is done, the task accomplished, the people will say, we've done this ourselves. I think that's fantastic. So it's about working with them, encouraging them, helping them, but also accepting them where they're at, and not trying to impose anything with them. So to do that, then you have to have great patience. You must have great belief. And I suppose for me, one of the things that I noticed, and this would be very connected with the workspace as well, a lot of people had huge personal ability, but they were unaware of it. And secondly, they had no confidence. And I was, towards the end of my time in prison, I was saying the greatest single gift and help you can give any other human being is to build their confidence if it happens to be low, and their self-esteem, because confidence opens so many doors, and it gives you that ability to put yourself forward. So and self-confidence, I found, was almost non-existent in prison, would you believe? Almost non-existent. Some of the most talented people had no self-belief at all, and they felt they were useless and worthless because they were indoctrinated with that message from childhood, and because us as a society made sure that they were alienated in communities where they had no connection with mainstream, they were poorly educated, they were cut off from the mainstream. And then and I asked that question because when I looked at the prison population, which I did in 1985 after being appointed Mountjoy, I discovered that 97% of the people came from the two lowest socioeconomic groups. And I discovered with research with the late Dr. Paula Mahoney that 6 tiny little areas in Dublin City, for instance, supplied 75% of all Dublin-born prisoners.
Wow.
Were the most poverty-stricken areas. So there was a direct connection between social alienation and poverty and imprisonment.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose it was that then. And so the biggest single thing I would say, if you said to me, what's the biggest single thing you can do to help people to reform or to rehabilitate themselves, I would say in respect, first of all, show them respect and encouragement. It's really all about encouragement, that consistent message. I know, I believe in you, I know you can do it, give it a go, keep trying, come back again. That is a message I would be saying is very much true in the workplace as well. That sometimes we dismiss people, we ignore them, or we criticize them. And that was the final thing I'd say on that count. The one thing I realized that doesn't help any human being, and it certainly didn't help any prisoner, and that was criticism.
Mm-hmm.
There's be quiet, because they were used to criticism. Punishment and criticism was the stuff they were lived on. That was their oxygen almost. And I discovered they just didn't take any notice of it. They expected to be criticized. And if you expect to be criticized, and when you're criticized, then it certainly doesn't leave any mark on you, except to confirm your negative self-thoughts in the first place. So it's so important to have that, to have that message constantly going out and repeating it and putting it into practice. Though it's no use talking about it. You have to live it as well. And that means that you recognize when people make an effort and you reward them in whatever way. And the best reward of all, most times, is giving praise and giving credit.
100%.
That would be my message to employers as well. Because lots of people that are high powered, they take credit, but they're not very good at giving credit. And I would say praise and giving credit to people is one of the greatest motivators, and it does make a huge difference to their well-being as well. Because people who feel well about themselves, they're going to be 20 times better employees than the person who feels very bad about himself.
100%. You've touched on so many interesting points there, and the point around self-confidence and self-belief, and linking that to recognition and praise in the workplace, and the wider societal and community factors. I think we're all primed for negativity, and we're all ready to kind of say, oh yeah, what's another thing I might not have done so well this time. And you can see it in an individual when you give praise, how their face, their body language, everything changes. And what I'm thinking of is, in your book, The Governor, you speak, I think it is in the open prisons, you had the garden, where you had the prisoners, take ownership and create that lovely little garden patch. And even the kind of forward thinking ideas that you had at the time with the drama school, and how that helped to build confidence and self-belief, to say, oh, maybe I do have a talent, maybe I do have a skill, maybe I do have another way of expressing myself rather than the old behaviors which I've learned. Can you talk a little bit about how, seeing the prisoners, go through that process? And I know the drama schools, the drama yearly event was very successful from the book. Yeah,
no, I suppose one of the things I'd say, because this is very much also going to be try to link it in with outside employers and people who would be involved in other things, I would say that in terms of one of the things the drama was indirectly connected to this, because we brought in the public, we invited in the public on that principle that I said earlier on. They're your prisoners, they're your prisons. Let's come in and see them in a positive way. And that was a lot of the thinking behind the drama. These were all people that were constantly criticized and ostracized and condemned. And now I was trying to show them in a positive way. I also wanted to show their families, to let their families see them in a positive way. So that when they were acting up on the stage, and when they were absolutely, Broadway levels of talent on that stage, or in Irish terms, the Abbey standards of the Abbey theatre standard of acting, that a family would come in, a mother and a father, or a partner or a child, and see that person who was condemned last year on the newspapers, on the television, and here he is now, he or she, in a very positive thing. And the link I was making was that employers, anything employers can do to link with local communities and to do some work in local communities to send out the message that we're bigger than just production, or we're bigger than just ourselves, that we have an interest in the local community. That gives people, workers and people, a huge lift, because they see themselves as contributing to something else. And that was part and parcel of the drama project. I would so strongly recommend drama. I mean, I'm always saying it in social disadvantaged areas. When you look at these facilities and amenities, they usually have none, which is, in some ways it's funny. Funny to think that we think as a society, and this is where I said us, that we think that it's okay to have children born into those areas, and then we expect them when they're 18 or 19 or 20, when they're adults. Why are you behaving like that? We never ask ourselves, did we actually contribute by not providing them with the opportunities to grow to their potential? What I said what I found in prison were quite a significant number of very, very intelligent, uniquely talented people. The sadness was they never even recognized that talent. Not alone did they not recognize it, but nobody else did either. So because we all depend on other people as well to recognize talent. And I'd be saying this regularly to employers all the time, be looking out for that hidden talent that's within people. Because lots of people go through life and their talent is never recognized, their real talent. And it's a very much a part of that. And that's what the drama was about doing. It was also introducing teamwork, because the one thing you learn on the stage is you depend on everybody else. And if you're not, the first next person hasn't his lines or her lines ready and isn't ready to do it, or if whatever it is doesn't happen, the proper lighting or the props or whatever, you will absolutely collapse. So they learn teamwork, which is something, by the way, that they had no concept of. They had no concept. And supporting one another, and all the dynamics that go into that was fascinating. It was just, and the reward, and it's easy to say this, for somebody to say this, but I know this is true. It was life-changing for many prisoners. And so a lot of life-changing things happen not by design, more by accident, in the sense that it's like the rising tides lift all boats. Like if you're involved in something like that, you're not directly doing it to change a life, but because of it, people's lives change. And I knew several people who never looked back ever. For the rest of their lives as a direct result of the drama. So the drama was, and one other thing which was I have to mention as well about the well-being of people, especially with the producers, the people who came in to produce. They were all outsiders, and we had three main producers that came in over the years to produce. They all had a philosophy that when people were asked to put their names forward for casting and for roles in the play, that they all had this belief or this philosophy that they try and not reject anybody, because prisoners were so used to be rejected. And again, back to employers and back to life, there's nothing more hurtful for another human being than rejection. There is no question about that, in my view, to be rejected. And we often do that unconsciously, even reject people, and that creates a lot of in employment and in industry and in different ways. People are often rejected. And the philosophy of not rejecting. So if a person didn't make, get cast for a role, maybe they got some little job at backstage, or maybe even one. I remember one case which was amazing altogether. The woman concerned was a very short-term person, and she didn't get any part of that, but they put her just making the tea for the cast and sweeping cleaning the floor, little things like that. Eventually, because one of the main characters withdrew from the play at short notice, she was asked to go on, and she brought the house down. She was amazing. Wow. Such an extent. Maggie was her name, and Maggie was so good that when she was in the play, wasn't she due for release on the Saturday, and the play was going on to the following Tuesday. She volunteered to stay, which she did, in prison in the Dorcas Centre in Mountjoy for the 3 extra days to finish her time on the stage. And one of the staff said to me on the Wednesday morning when she was released then, 3 days late, she said, "You should see her leaving this morning. She danced out the gate." Now, how can you measure the value of that to Maggie? Simple drama in a prison of all places. And so I suppose I'd be just saying that, providing the vehicle, sometimes the facilities, the environment for people and human beings, many of them will grow in that environment. And then it has, rather than setting out that I'm going to reform you, by putting in place facilities and being thinking about the sort of things that will help people to grow. The same with our work parties. They were exactly the same, going out to do the gardens for the elderly in the nursing homes, or building community centres, which we had a work party doing. They built about 27 community centres all around Dublin in the poorer areas. The satisfaction of doing that, going out every day, working in the community. I remember we had a work party up in Blanchardstown, and in one of the units there where the older people were resident. Not alone did they do an amazing garden there, but their friendship and their relationship with the older people that were in the as residents there, that was amazing, to such an extent that the residents used to look forward to the van arriving every morning, and the guys going in and chatting first, and then going out and doing the garden, or pushing somebody around in a wheelchair for a half an hour. That sort of, listen, you couldn't measure the value of that. And that's the sort of stuff tailored to suit any workplace. They're the sort of little things that can change lives and make people. And of course, the happier you have people, the better, obviously, the happier they are, the better the production, the better the environment, and the well-being feelings of everyone else as well. So there's tremendous potential in any on all those sorts of things, and I suppose taking risks as well. Davina, I would be saying to people, will you take risks, because lots of people want to play safe, and I wouldn't do that, or I couldn't do that, or I wouldn't do that. There's tremendous satisfaction in taking risks, because when they pay off, and by the way, most times they do, and that was my experience anyway. We had occasions like when I was asked first, would we do a live Christmas midnight mass from the women's prison? Most people, live television, they'll all riot, they'll all go crazy, they'll all protest. I said, no way, I bet they won't. And they didn't. And we did it on 2 different occasions. And on both occasions, the prisoners were absolutely amazing, even though it was being streamed out live from the prison. So afterwards, then what do people say? Well, it was fantastic. So you have to take some risks. And sometimes you lose, and you have to take it on the chin, say, right, that didn't work. But, I would say to employers, you have to take risks. You have to do new things. Just because something was happening for the last 30 years and worked okay, maybe something new will stimulate new interest and give people new energy. And, because change, while we resist it in some ways, change is also exciting.
Oh, definitely. And I think you're touching on, again, so many different topics there, that community, the purpose, the meaning, we do, there's that, the term, corporate social responsibility, and some employers will release their employees for the, a number of days a year to engage in the community, to give back. And having been part of that myself in previous employment as well, it's just lifting your head up above the building that you're coming into every day, taking a look outside of the community. And one of the things that when you're speaking about the midnight mass for the women's prison, it's that sense of pride in developing that pride and of who you are, and then having that out in the community as well. And I think that's one thing, that as a society, we've started to kind of pull in a little bit closer. It's more about the individual rather than the community, but we're seeing those cracks appear. That model isn't necessarily the best for us, or the way that we're wired to be as healthy as we can be. We know it's the strong foundations of community and purpose and meaning which really drive our well-being. So it's great hearing that, and I think that's a real message to kind of take home to anyone who's listening, and you don't need to be in management, you can just have a non-managerial role, come up with an idea that you know is going to give some benefit to your immediate team. And we're looking at what's happening with the pandemic. A lot of communities, well, the whole community needs that additional support. There might be additional things that can be done. And when things are achieved, and by a large group of people, you see how that changes everyone. Just as you were speaking there about the drama productions, it's that sense of the sum is greater than the parts. All of that comes together in that community environment. So I was going to just come back to the point you were talking about, or we're going to talk about, around mistrust and how that plays out in workplaces and well-being, subsequent well-being, when there's a level of mistrust. Are you able to talk a little bit more on your views about that?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, because I became aware of that very quickly as well, of the whole thing of the because I believe that, for personal development, there has to be a significant element of trust, because you must be saying to the person, I believe in you and I trust you to do the best you can, and all that sort of stuff. So prisons then became environments, and they are today, they haven't changed, because all the physical stuff isn't there for fun. Like, I mean, if I trust somebody, I'd hardly put a big wall around them, and hardly lock them in, not lock inside one door, but lock them inside several doors, and surround the place with all sorts of security, search them regularly, or checking them, counting them, all sorts of things that are all insulting to the human being. They're absolutely sure anyone could understand that it's totally, you anything and everything that you're constantly being watched, monitored, not for positive reasons, but for negative reasons. So then to try to balance that off, and try to help the individual to grow and develop, is a very challenging thing. But it's equally in the workplace again, where there's, now I understand that there's a need for overall supervision. Of course I do. I'm not naive, but there's a number of different ways of doing it, and you don't have all the time to be in their face and to be in obviously quite clearly demonstrating that you don't trust the person. And I believe that in that. So in prison, especially, I suppose one of the measurements that I put down as the greatest measurement for a manager now, and for anyone down along at different levels, and including at home, the real measurement to know if you're operating in an environment of trust, what happens when you're not there? That's the ultimate test. If you're away for a day off, or if you're out sick, or if you're on holidays, how does your organization operate while you're away? And the real litmus test is, if it operates better than when you're there, then you're winning. Now, some managers and some people in authority would take that as an insult. That is the greatest compliment that you can get. You see, if the place operates better when you're away than when you're there, what it means is that your staff are working, and are more conscientious and determined that they won't let you down. I always remember Roy Keane, the famous soccer player, Manchester United soccer player, Corkman. I always remember him talking about Ferguson, his manager, and he said, when he had a bad game or a bad first half, when he went into the dressing room, he said, Ferguson, all he had to do was look in his direction, and he knew, I have left you down today. I haven't done my best. And he said, I always went out in the second half to say, well, I'll rectify that. He said he had to say nothing, because they asked him, what did he say? He said nothing. He just looked. And the look alone was enough for Keane. And that's what it's about. It's about that thing of respecting the person and saying, I'm going to do my best for you. And that's created by delegation is huge. I found that as well. By the way, I inherited the prison service when there was no delegation. And I can say that. I'm saying that humbly now, because it doesn't matter to me at my age. But I did inherit an organization or an institution that had no delegation. Everything stayed with the governor. Even to the nitty-gritty of authorizing the changing of an electric bulb in a cell was signed by the governor. Crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And people, but what happened was nobody had responsibility. They all passed the buck up along. And at the end of the day, And so one of the greatest cultural things in the prison was that every decision that was made that was unpopular was always attributed to the governor. The governor said it. It wasn't me as the supervisor or the manager on the floor. No, just the governor said it. And that was one of the things that I used to try to get kids out saying, no, just you're making that decision, not me. And so delegation. And I also found, by the way, that for people, sometimes you had a member of staff and he or she wouldn't be really putting the work in. And people would, you get the name, you get the name of someone. Well, you couldn't put him in charge of anything. So she's useless. This title that people give to people. And sometimes people are happy with that title. So I have no responsibility now. So I'll get on fine my life. I'll have nothing to do. I found the very opposite. I found that the answer to that was to bring that person in, explain to them and give them specific responsibility and say, now you are responsible for this. And and you give them whatever help you. Of course you do. You don't set them up to set them up to fail. You set them up to succeed. But you say to them, but you are responsible for this. And I found, honestly, a revolutionary change in people because and so. I mean, I could tell several stories of amazing change in people, people that were regarded as absolutely wasters on the staff. And when they got response, and the other secret was to give them work that they enjoyed or they were good at. Sometimes people, they're round pegs in square holes, but they're very talented in one area, but they're working in a completely opposite area, and they have no talent for that, and everything is. So all these things, delegation, giving people responsibility, and then giving them recognition. Recognition is huge. When you're out talking to people, or when you're going around, and there's nothing better, by the way, for a person's feeling than third-party endorsement. It's fantastic. Third-party endorsement. That is somebody else saying to you, I heard you were brilliant yesterday. Or I heard at the meeting yesterday that you have done fantastic work. Well, that puts people up on a pedestal, like they're delighted with themselves. And that's what I was saying. That's the sort of stuff that you're building up and trying to counteract. So if you operate, even in an environment of mistrust, if you operate with the principle of treating people with respect, that certainly reduces the damage of mistrust. Relationships are also huge. If you can develop relationships with people, professional relationships, but very, very genuine relationships with the person, that also has a great, so for instance, in education, teachers seconded into the prisons were regarded by the prisoners as not official staff because they came in from outside. They enjoyed a tremendous relationship. Chaplains, always in the prison, had an amazing relationship with the prison, again, because they were associated with the non-authority, role of the prison. They were able to work in that environment very well, because when we asked the prisoners in Mountjoy, who do you trust the most? The chaplains won hands down, but they earned that because I suppose the two things that the chaplains put, and the teachers, but the chaplains in particular, the two things, and this is good for employers as well and for people in management and in the workplace. The two things that they came out head and shoulders over every was non-judgmental. We started at the beginning, so the chaplain wasn't asking the guy, "What are you in for? What crime did you commit? Are you a murderer? Oh my God!" They couldn't care less what you were in for. They had no interest what you were in for. They were interested in you as the human being, and that was huge. And the second thing was confidentiality. I know I can talk to the chaplain, and it will stay with the chaplain. And they are the two huge things that I would say counteract the environment or the atmosphere of mistrust: confidentiality and non-judgmental stuff.
Mm-hmm. Two things, we can definitely take into the workplace wherever we're working. How are we speaking about others? Is there, a sense of discretion around, people who may need to share any kind of problems that are coming up, any difficulties that they're having in their role, but that bit about being human is probably, going to be the most important thing, especially when we're thinking about what's happening on the kind of global platform. and we're all like, we're chatting to each other through a screen right now. And how do you convey that sense of, I'm interested in you and what you're saying, and bringing that into your work meetings consistently? I think that's probably a challenge which we'll all rise to and will adapt, and many of us have the skills there to evolve them for the online working platform. And we've had a year of it now, so we should be getting there. But I think there are still going to be challenges within the workplace, especially fast-paced workplaces, where it might become more task focused. The interactions may have a slight vulnerability to slide into the task focused conversations. What do I need to get from you? What do you need to get from me? How do we complete this task? Whereas kind of slowing it down and taking that time, the water cooler conversations, or you're walking from one place to another and you're just talking about general things that aren't in relation to anything about work, and having that contact, that connection with that person on a more deeper personal level is going to be the thing which really needs to be nurtured on this remote working world. I'm interested to know, throughout all your experiences with working with, whether it's the prisoners or your own staff or anyone, has there been times when you felt like it's too hard, it's that you felt like your faith was waning? And because you spoke earlier about the perceptions that other people may have of prisoners and saying, well, they're not them, they're actually part of us, it's a whole community. Were there any times when you kind of felt like you were bringing quite a authentic, this is the way I treat people, this is the way I want others to be treated, this is the way they should be treated? And did you ever have kind of pushback to say, no, that shouldn't be the way? And how did you manage that? How did you manage your own well-being and your own kind of sentiment in knowing that what you were doing was right for the people versus a different perspective?
Yeah, it's a huge complex issue as well. And just before I go, I answer that, I just wanted to say, because we talk about confidentiality, I just wanted to say one thing about confidentiality and all that goes with it, and showing respect and being non-judgmental. One of the, again, a fundamental philosophy that I had was I never involved myself in any gossip whatsoever in the workplace, none. And nobody ever came to my office with gossip, for a very good reason. They wouldn't have been entertained. So I didn't mind what was being said at the union meeting, because naturally the governor, being the boss, would have been absolutely criticized and happy. I didn't want to know. I said, that's their right, let them act. So I'd be saying to people, don't entertain gossip, because if you gossip, you shall be gossiped about. And gossip is so damaging to people's well-being and all that. So that was very important. Second thing was, I think, it's very important that you believe in your values and your principles, and you live by them. You live by them. The truth, honesty, showing respect, decency, kindness. Be kind to people no matter what. Even your enemies, in inverted commas, the ones that are difficult, whether they're staff or not. I did that. So when somebody was in trouble, it didn't matter who they were, you absolutely treat them the very same as the person you got on very well with. So in other words, you don't allow any personal sort of relationship things to judge, to decide, and to in some way influence your decision making. You decide on the basis of the principles that you live by: honesty, truth, integrity, decency, showing respect. And you use those values every time. It doesn't matter whether it was the most popular or unpopular. I used to say, and I try to practice that not alone, as best as I could, 100% if I could, and that was have no favorites. Don't have favorite people, because if you have favorites in your organization, you're also going to create a whole lot of mistrust and a whole lot of bitterness and jealousy and all that sort of stuff. So there's a whole lot of dynamics that are important to try. Don't set out to be popular or unpopular, because again, some people do that. I heard people boasting that the staff hate me. So how can you be effective if the staff hate? Or other people setting out to be the most popular person. You don't do either. You set out to do your job. And that's the other thing about showing respect, is the status that a job has does not raise the status of the person. The
person is still a basic human being, and he or she should be treated like that. They shouldn't be put up on a pedestal because they're the governor or they're the manager or they're the director. They're a human being, the same as you and I, but we're doing a different job. It's the job that's up on the spec, not the human being. And that's why some people really abuse that, because they think because they have a high-powered job that they're high-powered themselves. Well, they're not. They're just fundamentally human beings. And if they think like that and operate like that, they're going to connect to people. And that's very, for me, very, very significant. How you do your job is how you feel. But so for me, I believe in the values and the principles that I live by or that I promoted. And on that basis, then so I must say, gosh, I can say this, that for the 42 years that I worked there, I never went in one day disillusioned, or I never went in one day in bad form, or I never went in one day saying, oh, Jesus, I hope I hate going in here today. And I think that's a part of it. I think if you love what you're doing in that sense, and that you're engrossed in it, a very important part, Adina, absolutely crucial for me, for my philosophy was, but you leave the job in the job when you come out the gate. That is huge.
I was going to ask you about this because we've spoken about this before, and I love your perspective on this. So yeah, like work-life balance, well, what is exactly that, leave the job where it is. I know this is one of your techniques for managing your own well-being. Yeah.
I mean, I would say of all the things, even before you go into work and life balances, and they're all very important, but psychologically, I would say, there's two dimensions to it. Leave your family and your private life at home, and leave your job in the job. And that's a discipline, and it is a discipline, and you have to practice it, and when you start thinking, going home in the car about the job, you say, turn on music. And I'm not going there. And the same at night time. And I said this before, that my family knew when I worked. I never discussed work ever when I came home. And I was involved in other things, sport and coaching and all. And I found all those things brilliant, because they completely took you out of that environment. And of course, then in the morning you went in totally refreshed and totally new again, and you hadn't all this stuff in your head burning away all your energy. Thinking about and planning, and some people, think that doesn't mean anything. It means a huge lot, because it's about enthusiasm. Like, you're not just going through the motions every day. You're going because you're alive, and people notice that. So people notice that this person is alive, and this person is alert, and so example is huge. I believe it's a lot bigger and more significant than people think it is, because it's like parents sometimes thinking that their children doesn't notice. They notice everything. They notice every single thing. So do staff. They notice every single thing you do. So I just maybe share this with you. I was down after retiring about 5 or 6 years ago, down in West of Ireland one night, and I was giving a talk to the community. And one person in the community at the end asked me, they said, what is your legacy in relation to prisons? Which I honestly believe. I said, well, I don't think I have a legacy. I did my stuff. I did what I thought was right. I got 42 years ago at it. And I really, got great satisfaction out of it. But in terms of a legacy, I said, I doubt if there's any such thing as a legacy. And this guy stood up and he said, well, you don't know me, but I'm working in the prison service for the last number of years. And he said, I'm not working in Mountjoy, but I'm working in Castlereagh prison. And he said, I just want to tell you that you have a legacy, actually, and you're still mentioned regularly in relation to the way the philosophy you had. So I wasn't aware of that, but he was. And so I'm just saying to employers, like, don't underestimate how significant your example is. And if you do the things that, treat people properly, there's a great chance that all of the other people working with you will treat people properly. So that all these things, and so therefore it is very important that you mind yourself. This is about well-being. And you see, this is why it is so important. In the old days, we couldn't care less about staff. And I can honestly say that at the beginning, at the very beginning, I didn't realize how significant staff are. But your organization is totally dependent on your staff and how they are. And if they're feeling well, and if they, so that's why, leaving the job behind you, leaving your family at home, sleep, the very basics that everyone talks about, the quality of sleep is so important. Diet is so important, and exercise. Of all the things I'd be saying to people, that I've done a huge amount of exercise all my life, and I'm still doing it. And I found that, come home in the evening and go for a run of 7 or 8 miles, amazing. You come back, have a shower, so you're as fresh as a daisy again. All your day's stuff is gone. And so that is how you mind yourself in some way. You leave the job in the job, and you leave home at home when you're at home. And then you try to balance things that you have an interest in, or that takes you away completely mentally from that environment that can be very demanding and very, very stressful if you allow it to be stressful. And I believe that as well. Because I'd be saying to people, look, if a job is causing you that much stress, get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
In the long term, you're not alone are you damaging yourself, but you're damaging everybody else as well. And sometimes people are afraid to do that. And I saw that in my old job a lot, where people took on responsibility. They weren't cut out for it. Very good people, but they just weren't cut out for that responsibility. And it wrecked them mentally and physically and emotionally. So, and I'd be saying, if it causes that much damage to you, don't do it. It's not worth it. Life is too short, and the quality of life is too short.
Just going to say, when you were talking about, parents and, in essence, that full life that you've described that you had outside of work, the pandemic has made our worlds a lot smaller. And I think what you're talking about there is also that importance to reorient our perspectives and go, what am I doing at the end of work? Am I shutting my laptop down? Am I going to watch the TV, or am I actually moving? Am I still trying to do as best as I can with the things that are available to me? Have you seen much of that as a challenge, maybe in your own experiences, or with your own groups, your own network, in the sense of parents?
I'm absolutely convinced that the pandemic has done huge damage, and psychologically, mentally, and emotionally to human beings. And I think we won't be able to measure the damage for quite a number of years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not just now. I'd also be saying to people that while technology is brilliant, and because I see this stampede for working from home and all this sort of stuff, and I'd be flashing a red light saying, hold on now, steady up now. It's not normal to spend 24/7 in a house in a confined area on your own, or it's not normal. And while at the moment, and part of that can be very effective, but I'd be warning against. Human beings are social beings. They do need social contact. They do need to have some direct contact with other human beings for all sorts of reasons. So, the pandemic has forced us to do things, but most things that are done, we're also very resilient, a lot more resilient than people think. But that doesn't mean that we're not being damaged a bit, because human beings, look at the concentration camps and the way people survived in them, and you say, how could you possibly? Well, that's because of human resilience. It's the same with the pandemic. Just because we can survive it and overcome it and be able to, doesn't mean that it's good for us. And it's not good, in my view, it is not good for us because of the need for us to have contact with people. Also, psychologically, to be going from one place to another place. And I know, and I take account of travel and traffic and all that, and they are issues and they need to be addressed. But at the same time, the other side of the coin is, I don't believe it's like prison in a way. And the other part of the pandemic is and people now are beginning to realize it. At the moment here in Ireland, we're getting really impatient about sort of demanding that the government tell them, well, when are we going to unlock? As if the government knows when we're going to unlock, because they don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's what going to prison and being in prison serving an indefinite sentence is like. You don't know when you're getting out, and to cope with that all the time, is damaging. There's no question in my view. Of course, it's damaging. It creates stress and anxiety, and when you have stress and anxiety in your life, you are damaging your physical body and your mental body. Absolutely. So let there be no misunderstanding. And a lots of people, like you're trying to work, you're doing childcare, you're doing homeschooling, you're doing cleaning, you're doing You cannot do all those things. We expect people to do it. Some people are doing it, but I'd say most people, that if they're honest to themselves and honest to others, they're under tremendous pressure to try to do all the things and still be confined, because we do need space. We need to get out sometimes. I'm always saying to parents when I'm giving little parenting talks, the one thing you must do every single day is get out of that house. No matter what happens, you must get out of that house and go for a walk, and preferably with somebody that you're friendly with, that you have a nice little chat where it is very positive and where it's a nice experience. So I'd be saying we need to reflect on the pandemic when it's over, when we have a control of it, pick out the bits that were really, really good, that brought about change, because it did force us to make lots of changes, which are brilliant. But also look at the things we are missing and try to, cherry pick the things that are also things that are essential for the human being's welfare. I'd be very concerned about children because of the whole breakdown in social contact, physical contact, all that stuff. I believe all that is huge for children, especially playing sport. Doing away with sport, in my view, is crazy for children. I still say it's crazy. I'd say pandemic or no pandemic. What is, the pandemic is one thing, but the life activities of children and the lifelong damage that can be done to children. I know from people talking that too much screens. It's very hard. Double messaging. You talk about the government giving double messages, but look, parents are giving double messages, and we're telling our children regularly, get off that screen. That screen is bad for you. And then all of a sudden, they can be on a 8 or 9 hours because you're homeschooling. So it's completely wrong. And now when it's all over and we're back to normal, it's going to be a massive battle to get children back out playing sport again. And a lot of children have lost interest, because that's what happens with children. They're not doing it all the time, then they lose interest. And the damage of that, because again, I come back to my absolutely fundamental philosophy for every age group from 3 or 4 upwards. I'd say if there's one thing I'd advocate, and that is physical activity for everybody. Physical activity. It doesn't have to be sport, anything. Walking, running, cycling, swimming, anything. If you're playing sport, active sport and physical sport, that's brilliant, because you're doing the two things together. But I would say the one thing we need to keep promoting in Ireland is more and more and more about physical activity. Come home from work, go for a walk, go for a run, do something. Sitting down is definitely the worst thing for our health. We know that now. We need to reduce it as much as, and that's all linked to well-being. And if you're looking after yourself, physically and mentally, emotionally, when you're out of work, the reality is that when you're in work, you're going to be a far more capable, happier, contented, resilient person. They all link together.
Oh, they do. And it's also, what you're speaking about there is bringing the control back. Where do you have control to change things? And exactly like you're saying, sitting down, it's a silent killer. Sedentary behavior, we know how detrimental it is to our well-being and the health risks associated with it. And yeah, physical movement, whatever it is, get out the house, do what you can. It doesn't have to be a marathon. Start small.
Yeah, and I think that's from what we're talking about today, mainly aiming at employers and the workplace. It's very important that employers see that as part of their responsibility as well. So if a person is working from home all the time, that they're conscious of that it's not the same as being in the office. And you have other people at home, you have children, you have spouses, you have a whole lot of different people who have equally vested interest. And for employers to recognize that and to do something about it, like giving a person a half day off or giving an extra week's holidays or something, it is very important to indicate that I, as the employer, am aware of this, and this is something I'm going to do to try to reduce it, or at least to give recognition to it. Because human beings like to be thought about, to be recognized. And the small things, I always say to people, if you're, in any sort of medium-sized organizations, I'll try to get to know the first names of all your employers, try to get to know some little things about them that are like, if someone is sick in the family, little things that show that you care, because that is a great reward. This person isn't a number. This person isn't just, that's why I hate the term human resource. I hated that term.
I'm with you on that, John. Yeah.
Human resources. I'm not a human resource of anybody. I'm a human being. I much prefer the old personnel office to label. You are dealing with the personnel, but this thing of I'm not a resource. I'm a human being, and I provide a resource for you in certain ways, but I am not your resource. Because I think that's very important that people feel, no, I'm more important than a job. A job is only one tiny part of who you are. And there's a lot of other elements to you, and should be, and I wouldn't apologize for that. My job is important, but it's not the be all end all. And there are other parts of me that are equally important.
Yep, exactly. And I think one thing that I've seen is, when you start to think of people as just pure resources, it depersonalizes that individual that you're working with, and it does focus on the transaction and task focused interactions rather than the conversations that actually mean something and will mean something to that person and to yourself as you get to know them. And because we are human beings, there are going to be times when we're all going to go through periods of stress and overwhelm, and having that support around you is going to be one of your indicators for coming out it as healthy as you can be. So I think it's also recognizing that relationship goes two ways. Like you spoke about earlier, if a manager takes leave from work, the system should operate without that person there. So it's more than just task completion. It's coming back to who are we as human beings, how do we look after each other as human beings, how do we feed into that society, whether it's the workplace, the wider society, the community. It's really thinking about how all those systems move and work together and feed off each other. Definitely.
Yeah.
So John, it's been absolutely amazing having you here today. I could spend all day talking to you, to be honest. I think we've only just started to skim the surface of all the different areas of philosophy and well-being and community that we could cover. But it's been great having you here, and I hope our listeners will be able to take some of these tools away with them. I'm sure they will. Are there any final words that you want
I guess the only thing we didn't really talk about, and just to mention it because it's important, I would be saying very strongly to people with responsibility and in authority in organizations to develop the skill of listening and hearing. From the door person to the cleaner to the tea maker to the chief, it doesn't matter what they are. They're human beings. The van driver, it doesn't matter who they are. Develop the skill of recognizing people. So always recognize the person. If you have their first name, it's brilliant. And always be appreciative. Always appreciate. So thank you is powerful. And then listening to people and hearing what they're saying. It doesn't mean that your democratization, the organization, that the majority rules. It's not. But you will be enriched if you listen and hear people, because some people maybe low down the scale of job status could have amazing information and major observations to give you. And if you're that person who, I'm always reminded of Terry Wogan, one of our most famous ever broadcasters. And in the documentary in England, the BBC did on his life, which was a tribute in itself. He was Irishman from Limerick, but he was recognized as a world-class broadcaster. But I remember one woman talking about him, about him in the studio and how humble he was. And she said, one of the things about Terry Wogan is he knew every single person from the door in by first name. And he made a point every single day of talking to them about their lives and sitting down with them and chatting with them and having fun with them. She said, from the doorman in, and that's an indication of class, not status, just class.
Great final words. Thank you, John. That's been,
Great.
As I said, it's been
Thanks.
Absolutely amazing having you here with us today. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for listening today. And we look forward to hopefully catching up with you again on another occasion.